What's up, everybody? Holy Smoking Jay here, Joe Gonzalez, driving up to Santa Clarita. Actually, I'm already here, meeting up with Jeremy Yoder of Mad Scientist BBQ. Got invited to hang out with him today to kind of watch him cook, maybe even jump in there and do some cooking myself, some prep work, etc. Been really networking with him and a few other people that I've started to follow just on YouTube, and then, you know me, I sought them out because I want to learn from the best and I want to do my best. So join me on today's little journey. What's up, everybody? Holy Smoking Jay here. Like I said, I'm here with Jeremy Yoder of Mad Scientist BBQ. This guy is one of the first guys I started to watch when I got that barbecue bug. I started watching all his videos from about 2 years ago. He actually invited me up to kind of cook with him today. So Jeremy,
barbecue master class.
A barbecue master class. And we were just talking actually about wood, right? Because that's one of my biggest questions too, is like, what's the difference between green wood and dry wood? I hear a lot of that all the time. And I have actually bought wood just from Home Depot.
Yeah.
Is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily. It's usually kiln dried at Home Depot. I think that has something to do with making sure that any kind of pest is dead. So if they ship it across the country, it's not going to infect new wood somewhere. Okay. But yeah, that should burn really well.
Oh, okay.
But the issue is you don't want your wood to be too dry, or else you lose a lot of the good flavor characteristics, because in the process of it burning, it actually starts ejecting little compounds too quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't produce all the flavor-filled compounds that make barbecue good.
See, this is why this guy is the Mad Scientist barbecue guy. So what do you cook with or smoke with? What's the term? Actually, let's start there. Is it cook or smoke?
Either.
Okay,
it's interchangeable, but it's not grill.
It's not grill. That's
grill.
That I learned. That I did learn. So what do you cook with?
Here I use oak because it's what's available and it's a good smoking wood.
Yeah.
My favorite is pecan. Okay. So I have a cord of pecan that I was able to finally find. I found a cord. A cord is 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet when it's stacked. But
you're always going to learn something when this guy's talking. I'm just telling you that right now.
Right. But I have that sitting and drying out right now. So hopefully around May I can start using that. And that's my favorite wood. I think it provides a sweeter flavor on the barbecue. Not in a cloyingly sweet way, but it just adds an extra dimension that you don't get with oak, even though oak is very good.
Yeah. So when you say dry, you're letting it dry out. So literally it takes months for it to fully dry out. Because you just gave me the example of the weight of the wood, and that's how I can tell it's green.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the longer I let it sit and dry out,
right,
the lighter the wood becomes?
Correct. So it's like, if you ever reach for a milk carton and you think it's full, but it's empty, and you're...
Yeah.
So, like, knowing the difference in weight between green wood and seasoned wood, so you can say dry wood or seasoned wood, is eventually, after you handled enough of it, you can tell by the weight. Like, oh, this is nice and dry. It's going in the fire.
Okay.
Or this is still pretty green. I'm going to set it on top of the firebox, heat it up, and hopefully drive away a little of the moisture and get it hot enough that it lights quickly when it's in the firebox.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions I've had, because when I'm hanging out with you or Alec over at Pearls, or when we went to Austin, I saw that they'd pick up the wood and say, oh yeah, this is a good dry piece of wood. I'm like, how do they know that? But now that makes sense. So just the lighter it is, the more you're pretty certain it's dry.
Right. So after you handle enough wood, you'll be able to tell the difference. But until then, if you have any questions, you can go get a wood moisture meter. It's got 2 electrical prongs. You jab it into the side of the wood, and it sends an electrical pulse between the 2 prongs. And basically, the more water is present, the better the electricity flows. So based on the ratio of how much electricity passes from one to the other, they can determine the moisture content of the wood. So you don't have to guess. You can know, boom, 23% moisture. Ready to rock and roll, throw it in the fire.
So would you say that besides the many kind of bullet points you have to hit for a good cook, wood is definitely, dry wood is one of the first and foremost?
Yeah, so having well-seasoned wood is very important. If you really know what you're doing, you can pull off a great cook with greener wood, wood that's got more moisture in it. But you're going to have to adjust the cooking process slightly. Probably wrap earlier. Just monitor the quality of the smoke. If you're burning a really clean fire, you can rock and roll with that. You don't have to worry about it. But chances are the smoke's going to be a little dirtier than ideal, but it can still produce a good barbecue.
So cool. So we just showed that shot of your firebox. So what's the process there?
Basically, it's burn enough wood so that you build a coal bed so that any new pieces of wood that you put on there are going to burn efficiently. They're going to light quickly, and you're not going to have any kind of smoldering wood sitting in the firebox. basically destroying the flavor of the barbecue. You're going to spend hours and hours cooking.
Okay.
And so basically I'm going to build a lattice of wood so that the flames can climb up the wood, right? Because flames climb because that hot air is going to rise.
Exactly.
So give it a framework upon which it can climb.
Okay.
And then also by doing it in the kind of the lattice formation, you leave enough space in between the pieces of wood so that there's sufficient oxygen to allow the wood to continue to burn. As those things burn down, you're going to form a coal bed that's going to be basically the primary combustion that's going to light new pieces of wood that you put on.
Okay.
Yeah. But you see that smoke coming out, even in the sunlight, it's very light.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get better.
Definitely.
Like this.
So that's the kind of fire we want.
The only difference is when we're, going through the cook, we want there to be a big bed of coals. Right now the fire hasn't been going long enough to produce a big bed of coals, but that's the heart of the cooking process, is your bed of coals. And the coals basically light the new wood. It's kind of the insurance policy. Say you're distracted doing something else, say you're wrapping 20 briskets, and you come back to the fire and you look like, oh man, the fire's done. But if you have a raging hot bed of coals there, you throw on some new pieces of wood, they catch like that, and you're back up and cooking.
Okay. So you're not really losing any time there by doing that. You're saving yourself time.
Right.
By having a good bed of coals.
And basically it ensures that the wood's going to burn cleanly.
Gotcha.
Right. So if you don't have a good bed of coals, you're going to have a hard time getting the fire to burn well. You're going to have a hard time maintaining temperature. The coals are the bedrock of the cooking process, and so that's something that often gets overlooked. But having a big coal bed is essential, and that's why I recommend against people using grates in the firebox, because they think, oh, airflow is going to be good. But what happens is the coals actually burn too quickly, and you don't maintain the coal bed. And when you put on new wood, there's not enough coal there to light it properly. And so part of it is, it does make sense. More oxygen, good. But it's somewhat counterintuitive. Because the coals are burning in what's called primary combustion, they can deal with less oxygen and they won't produce off flavors, right? So what you do is you let that kind of sit at the bottom of the firebox and just maintain kind of just a consistent heat that's going to light the wood, that's going to provide the flavor. So those coals at the bottom aren't about flavor, they're about lighting new pieces of wood.
Gotcha. Longevity of the fire, basically, just making it last longer.
That's what keeps it going.
Gotcha. So another big kind of question I had for Jeremy was like foil paper or butcher paper. Now I know there's some meats that you would wrap in foil paper, some you would suggest in butcher paper.
Sure.
But what's the big difference there? Like, how does that? What's that really doing?
Yeah. So essentially, what's happening when you wrap is you try to mitigate the effect of what's called evaporative cooling. Just like when you sweat, you cool down because the heat energy that you have in your body is being transferred to the water that's then leaving, you cool off. Okay. So the same thing is happening to meat when it's cooking. It's kind of pushing that water is evaporating and cooling the meat. And so when you get to the stall in the cooking process, what's happening is the amount of energy leaving by the meat evaporating water is equal to the amount of energy you're adding with your fire. Okay. Right? So that piece of heat is gaining energy and losing energy at the same rate, so it stays at the same temperature. Okay. So by wrapping, you stop the evaporative cooling process. Just like when you go into a steam room, you sweat like crazy because the air's already saturated with moisture. And so you sweat and you don't cool off. And so what you do by wrapping is you create that kind of environment. Now, if you go with foil, no water's escaping. If you go with butcher paper, there is some water because it's not impermeable to water. There is some water that rises to the surface and gets evaporated and cools off the meat you're cooking, but not as significantly as if you do completely unwrapped. So the reason I think butcher paper is superior to use for briskets is because it's about the bark, not about shortening the cook time. Yeah. If you're about shortening the cook time, wrap in foil, you can go, light speed and finish in hours less time.
And they call that the Texas crutch?
Texas crutch.
Texas crutch, yeah. Okay, cool. And then wrapping in butcher paper is just wrapping in butcher paper.
Right, so it adds more hydration on the exterior of the meat. It kind of slows the evaporative cooling process. And so you kind of soften that bark down. So you got all that flavor already in the bark. Now you want to make it as pleasurable to eat as possible.
So what meats would you, let's say, this meat I would always do in butcher paper, this meat I would do in foil paper, this one you can do either or depending if you're like short on time?
Sure. So beef, wrap in butcher paper. So beef, short ribs, brisket, or wrap in butcher paper. Okay. Pork products like ribs and pork butts, so do foil. And then other things like chicken, you just go unwrapped the whole time.
Unwrapped.
Yeah.
So like when you're doing a pulled pork, I've always done it in foil paper. There's no need to ever do that in a butcher paper. I actually now that I just answered my own question. I've never seen a video where somebody does it in butcher paper. So
Right.
never mind.
Right. That's a good idea for a video. I might do that.
Yeah, just to test it out, see what the difference is.
Yeah, it's because to me, what I'm trying to do is I have kind of a benefit that a lot of people don't have. When I do events, say I'm cooking 20 briskets, I can afford to take one of those briskets and try something completely new.
Yeah.
Right? And if it's a disaster, well, guess what? I still got 19 briskets.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I always do an experiment with something. It's extraordinarily rare for me to do a big cook and not try something new with a piece of meat.
And you always say you change one thing because then that way you know that
Always.
one thing worked.
Always one thing.
Okay.
Because that way you can attribute the difference in the outcome to that one thing that you changed.
Okay.
So that's how you do things in science, right? You're changing only one aspect. Everything else remains constant.
Exactly. Okay. I would always fall asleep in science class, but hanging
too.
out with this guy. Really?
Yeah, all the time.
See? I could have been a scientist.
It's basically about protecting what you're cooking. So what you essentially want is 100% yield on what you actually put in the smoker.
Yeah.
And so to do that, anything that juts out, you just blop off because you know it's not going to survive. So what's the point of putting it on the cooker or having to cut it off on the cutting board? Just put Put in the smoker what you know will survive the cook and what you know you can serve to your customers.
Got it.
Or your guests, or I guess the people that you're going to be serving the food to. So that's essentially the way I think about it. And I guess if you want to think about it in terms of being aerodynamic, that's fine. But it's not really how I think about it.
But you want to leave a layer on there enough, right? So obviously protect the meat, right?
Right. But you want to leave a small enough layer that it renders down so you're not chewing, white, chewy fat.
Yeah.
And so this one didn't really have a thick layer of fat here. It's relatively small. And so I'm going to leave pretty much the rest of that.
And what brand was this again? You mentioned it.
This is Creekstone Farms. And so I don't know if I'd call it the Rolls Royce of beef, but it's at least like the Cadillac of beef.
Yeah.
Maybe the Rolls Royce would be the foreign Wagyu. But they raise the animals humanely, which isn't why I started using it. It's nice that they do, but I started using it because I like the quality of the product. And so it's a nice side benefit that it happens to be humanely raised and no antibiotics, nothing like that. So it's good. So people can kind of get behind it and they like it.
Happy cows make for great meals.
Correct. So these guys really only have one bad day.